Thank you so much for having me here. Thanks for having me back, Pre. It's an honor. I love this opportunity. Um, these events help me pull all my thoughts together. So this is a gift that helps me rationalize and reconcile what's been going on in transformation for me. And I had a picture too, because I was here in 2019, and my, how things had changed, huh? We were so naive back in 2019. We had no idea what we were up to or what was going to happen. So going through a pandemic, all sorts of things happening in the workplace, lots of technological changes. So many things in 6 years. And now I am someplace else at Capital One. Back then I was at Fidelity, as you can tell by the green. And just a brief background of who I am and why I'm here talking and what I do. So I literally am an architect. So can I have that as my archetype? Does that work? So I was trained in architectural design. I have my bachelor's of fine art from Mass Art. And in the mid 90s, it was hard to get a job as an architect. And I didn't have my MArch. So I ended up working for some graphic designers. And one of those graphic designers ended up switching from print to web and started a consultancy to do a web design and web strategy. And so I became an information architect overnight, and a product strategist, and thinking about how to use this new channel strategically for many companies that were struggling with figuring out the API question. In 98, I moved over to a company called Gomez, who had created some scorecard methodologies to benchmark online brokerages against each other. And that they took that methodology and applied it against all financial services like banks and mortgages and insurance providers. And then anyone selling anything online, golf clubs, pet food, whatever it was. And I stayed there for a number of years, and then I went out on my own after a couple of mergers and acquisitions and transfers through Washfire and Keynote. So I was on my own for about a year and a half. And at that point, I moved to Nielsen Norman Group, and I worked for Jacob Nielsen for 6 years. And my areas of practice were information architecture, navigation design, persuasive design, social features, and analytics, the ads. I did that for 6 years, and then I decided to go back in-house, because of the things I was hearing in the classrooms as we were traveling throughout the world, teaching at Nielsen Norman Group conferences, and people telling me stories about the way UX was being treated in organizations and what was going on in those places. And I felt I need to go back in and see how it was working. So I was at Athena Health for almost 4 years, went through an agile transformation there and led transformation to scale design and research across 230 Scrum teams. After that, I went to Fidelity to do the same, but to focus solely on UX research and scale research across what became about 1,300 Scrum teams. And then August of last year in 2024, I went to Capital One with a new challenge. And so if you look at these phases of my career over the 30 years, it was, first of all, honing my craft, and then working with Nielsen Norman Group to teach the craft and figure out the best way to transform or to translate that knowledge. And now I focus on transformation. That's become my calling card in what I do for companies. And when I talk about transformation, there's several different flavors of that. Like we all hear about like digital transformations, agile transformations, but what does it literally mean when you're doing that in a UX or a design context? So at Athena Health, the transformation we were going through was a request from the business to move from a series of UX specialties to UX generalists. How many people here have been through that? Yeah, a fair amount. So like that happened. And we had to figure out how to do that and how to do that the best way possible for both the business and for the doctors and nurses and practice managers and all of the professionals using the Athena Health platform. The next transformation that I went through was taking UX research out of its home in UX and moving it to a different organization called Research and Insights, which was a grouping of different research disciplines. And I talked to Peter about this and Jesse about this experience, which was transformational for me as well. So working alongside market researchers, brand and advertising researchers, CX measurement professionals, behavioral economics team. Like that was amazing for us as UX researchers to hang out with these other disciplines, research disciplines, and learn and share information. And I definitely learned a lot doing that. And then the next one is taking a decentralized research organization, basically researchers all reporting up into a variety of design leads and centralizing that. So in Peter and Kristen's book, they call this a centralized partnership. It's basically a federated research team. So what does that mean? What does that look like? It's very simple. It's a central research org that has basic operational funding at that centralized horizontal level. And then there's lines of businesses who receive research pods, which are researchers and research leaders that support those lines of business. And the central research org is very responsible for making sure that the lines of business are getting what they need. Every line of business is different. And so, what they need and what they perceive as their needs, we need to think about how we're going to address that. And so, it's not just one corporate culture, there's cultures across multiple lines of business. This happens in larger companies where there's tens of thousands of employees and lines of businesses who tend to operate with some autonomy. We also establish and maintain well managed research practices. So, what does it mean to run a research practice? And how do we expect that to be done in each line of business? We also provide foundational research operations, including tooling and risk and compliance procedures, project support, participant recruiting, and a number of other types of operational and platform provided services. We oversee staffing alignment, and number one, we elevate the quality and impact of research. So all the researchers report up into my organization, but they are serving at the pleasure of the lines of business. So this idea of moving through a transformation, we need to be realistic in what that means. I was very lucky, like 10 years ago, working with another design leader, sitting in a conversation with a chief product officer who said, "This is what I want. I want the design team to go from this to this." And the design leader said, "That is awesome. I love that idea. And I can definitely do that for you. But it's going to take 2 years." And I didn't realize so you could do that until that point. You could say, that is a totally reasonable destination. That's a great outcome. I love that. But this is what it's going to take to do that. It's going to take 2 years and it's going to take X amount of money and it's going to take this type of transformation. So now I'm really pragmatic about what it's going to take from both me emotionally, but also from the team and from the company to make the transformation happen that you want to. And several years ago, I was out in California. Intuit was hosting a bunch of alums from IDEO. I am not an IDEO alum, but I was sitting in for someone who was. And I met Ofer Yom Tov, who had this beautiful illustration of transformation. He was running a transformation at ANZ Bank at the time in Australia and New Zealand. And so this is my version made with icons. We can all see here that I am not a visual designer. But this idea of living in the swamp of despair, there's alligators afoot, there's danger lurking, climbing out of the swamp and hiking it up the mountain, and finally getting to the mountain and being able to ski down. And so year one is about assessing and triaging and resetting. Is figuring out the swamp. Like, what's the deal here? Why are we in the swamp? What is this swamp all about? What's up with these alligators? And then figuring out the way to climb up and accelerate to get to that place of optimization. And there's a mindset that I've learned in the years that I've been doing this that are really super, super important. First of all, I was introduced to the Shine brothers and their work back when I was at Athena, but received formal humble inquiry training when I was at Fidelity, which was such an enormous gift from a manager of mine. And so the idea of humble inquiry is to walk into any situation, a business, wanting to transform, any organization, and be genuinely curious about what is going on and what they are good at and what they're learning, where they've been. I love the idea of that prologue. Like, what's the story here? What are the values and the way we think about how we got to where we are? It's that idea of being a good researcher, of listening actively, asking open-ended questions, and focusing really hard on building relationship capital. So as the previous speakers were talking about, it is a lot easier to get things done in an organization where you have exceptional relationship capital, where you have lots and lots of friends who trust you, who don't think that you are there to undercut them or throw them under the bus. We are here in a mission together. We've gotten to know each other personally, and therefore they trust that the things that we're asking for are the right things to be asking for. So humble inquiry is first and foremost the very most important thing. The other thing is pace over perfection, is to move quickly, make things, be a designer. So make things and test them and break them and learn from them. Where it's safe, obviously, if it's not safe to do those things with customers, don't do it. But there are many things where we can make something and see if it works. And if it doesn't, we can start over, we can scrap it, and use continuous improvement to make that happen. Business ownership is the other mindset. Think like a business owner. So I'm trying to figure out the destination that we need to get to help grow this business. And so, what does the business actually need? What do our customers actually need? And how do we maximize that impact that we have to help the business get there? So, you're always making trade offs. You are a business leader, not just a discipline leader. And then hands-on leadership is getting in the weeds, getting your hands dirty, looking at the work, swimming in the work, working with the researchers, working with the designers, evaluating the requests that are coming in, collaborating on plans and debriefs. That is true leadership. And at the end, I have some reading materials for you. There's an article about this in HBR that came out this month. So I think it's a great article about getting involved. And it's not micromanagement, it's just getting involved and using your discipline expertise to really help people hone their craft. So, the assessment phase. We want to identify and prioritize unmet and underserved needs. I think people are probably familiar with that term if you're a researcher, because that's what we're doing all the time when we're doing discovery work. But we're doing this from two sides. So I'm going in and I'm talking to researchers about what it is that they're trying to get done and what's working and what isn't. So, how are they partnering with their stakeholders? How do they feel about those partnerships? What research questions are those partners asking to be having answered? What insights are being used, are being activated, and are not being activated? And what impact do they feel like they're having? And what impact do they want to have? So, what's the transformation that researchers actually want to go through? And then doing the same with stakeholders in product, in design, and engineering, any of the stakeholders that are important that we've talked to often, how they make product decisions, how they currently utilize research and the perceived value of research, and really understanding with these open-ended questions what they think researchers do. This is a big clue to us. If I hear an answer like, well, researchers talk to people, that's a problem. That's a big problem. If they think that the only value that we offer is that we talk to people, and you can imagine why, because there's a whole bunch of product managers out there who think they talk to people too. And they're like, I can do that, so I don't need researchers. So I am going to include a slide in here that is very specific about what makes a researcher. But stay tuned because it's like, be patient, it's towards the end. But we want to make sure we understand the gap here. What is the gap between what stakeholders need and what research is providing? You could do the same type of gap analysis for designers, for product managers, for engineers, for really any discipline, but we just need to understand, where is there a gap in understanding of the value? The other thing I like to do is map the organization and where research requests are originating. So sometimes this comes later in the process, but if you can do it up front, it's really nice. I, of course, don't have real numbers up here, but we're showing that there's focus that goes from broad to narrow in an organization. You have the line of business at the top, then towers or domains, product areas that are then broken up into hundreds of product teams. If a vast majority of your research questions are coming from the product team area, they're going to be pretty narrow research questions about very specific small aperture details of a UI or maybe even a transaction. Um, and if you're talking to line of business owners or tower owners and they're saying, I don't really know what the researchers do here. My product teams deal with them. That's a really good clue of some balance that's out of whack. That we're really focused on narrow questions and we're answering a ton of them. but we're not able to combine those to create value up higher. I am going to talk about a method that we have started using this year that gets into how to deal with that. The other thing that I do is run a researcher needs evaluation. I'm obsessed with understanding these 14 questions in particular. And we just started running this quarterly, but I was doing it in spots before with researchers. And I had researchers actually answering these questions for every product area or product team they were supporting. Sometimes I had researchers that are supporting like 12 to 16 product teams. And they may have, you know, maybe 12 of those teams are doing great and 2 of them are not. I need to know that because those 2 that aren't doing great, that aren't great partners, could be causing a lot of stress for a researcher. So, do you have access to target users? Do you have access to the data that you need? Are you included in product team meetings? Never mind the fact if you can go to all of them because you're spread too thin, but are you even invited? Are you invited to product planning? Do you have direct access to designers? Really big, number 6, do you have direct access to product managers? This is a big blocker that we run into. And unfortunately, the people who are creating this blockage, I hate to say, is designers. Sometimes they block researchers from actually getting to talk to product managers because they want to hold on to and hoard that relationship. That is just not a great situation for researchers. Am I allowed to present my own work? This is a really big marker for me. If researchers aren't allowed to go into meetings and present the findings, and we have someone else doing that, like a product manager or designer, I need to know that. That's not a good situation. I receive direct feedback from my partners. Not that it goes through some weird feedback loop or someone tells me something and then I have to trickle it back down. I want to know that you're actually having open lines of communication. Um, my role in the team is clear. I have clear priorities. The team asks high value research questions. Yes, I am being judgy here, and I'm going to tell you why and what that means. Um, so there are low value research questions, and we'll talk about that. I have enough time to conduct quality research. I'm recognized for my contributions, and my research insights are actioned. Very important. We're going to close out this talk talking about that. So we're going to summarize. I can't show you the exact things that we have, but we're going to summarize the issues. We are going to talk about the root causes. What specifically is leading to these issues? That is an important step before we start solutioning. I want to understand why these issues are happening. Is it something we have agency over? There may be 5 root causes, but only 2 of them we can control. So we're going to figure out solutions based on those. These are the hypothesized solutions we've been working on this year. So first of all, putting a research framework in place. Second of all, research objectives and how to write them, how to write insights, how to engage with us and what our research process is. Formalizing a democratization program that was in place, streamlining participant recruiting, acquiring new tools, adopting new methods, and very importantly, activating insights. And the way I've lined these up and rationalized them for all of you is to think of this in terms of a pyramid that goes from standardization to modernization to multiplying and catalyzing. And I'm going to talk about several of these. The ones in gray, I'm not really going to go into. Last time I was here, I talked a lot about democratization. I'm not going to really talk about that as much. It happens. It's here. We use it. But I will talk about some guidelines for that. And I'm not going to talk about streamlined participant recruiting and acquiring new tools, but I am going to talk about the rest of these. So the research framework, very, very importantly, foundational, is to make sure that when I ask people what researchers do, they can kind of guess that better than the answers they were giving me before, which was they talk to people. So there's a purpose and a value. So the purpose of user research is to mitigate user customer adoption risk. I'm going to show you how we tuck that into existing knowledge spheres that product managers use. And the value is to support the product development life cycle, the PDLC, by answering critical questions. So what we like to do is jump on the coattails of things that are already in the DNA or in the bloodstream of the company. If you get a lot of product managers that are huge Marty Kagan fans, they love the SVPG, book trilogy, then let's use it. Let's hop on it. So the four big risks is an article that Marty wrote several years ago. I mean, it may even be 10 years ago. And I think there's been iterations of it since. But I like to use this because it's very simple and I put it on a wheel. Um, there's the side of the wheel that's user and customer adoption risk, which is focused on useful slash valuable and usable. And that's our bailiwick. Is that daily? Yes, that's where we play. That's where we're like really, really focused. There's also the business risk piece, which is viable and feasible. And the reason I have a start here marker is because a lot of issues that happen in companies who are spending way more than they want to on feature and product development is because they start on step 3. They start with feasible. And then they back their way into viable. Okay, since we are able to build this, how theoretically would it make money if anyone wanted to buy this? Then they reach out to the researchers and say, find a problem that this solves, and at the same time pull in the marketers and tell them to find people to sell this to. So, amen, right? Starting in feasible is the backwards. It's the hard way. I always say people, it's the hard way. Do it the easy way. Start with user needs first. Start with useful. Find useful problems to solve that will be, no question, the right thing for them to buy. Don't be a segue. Okay. So very simple of value. We created a user research framework being incredibly loosely and generously used here because it is not a framework, it's a list of questions. But these questions are questions that product managers, product teams, designers come to us all the time with. So let's make it easy for them to understand. Our first version of this was a pace over perfection. We put 9 questions out there, and in June, we added a 10th question, which is number 8. But this is very, very simple. And I do not talk about methods at all in this. It's just not part of the conversation. The conversation is about what is the question that's keeping you up right now that you need to answer. And I'm going to give you a deliverable. And the reason the deliverables are there is because we have been curating a catalog of example deliverables, example user needs requirements, an example of an experience gap analysis, an example of a feature prioritization. So we can say, this is how we're going to answer your question. Here's an example of it. Do you like it? Yes, that's what I want. Great. So in discovery, what are people trying to accomplish? What user needs are critical for us to meet in order to drive adoption and success with our experience? Number 2, how do people currently meet their needs? Number 3, which hypothesized features improvements will best serve critical user needs? Number 4, competitive analysis. What are the best design practices for these or comparable features? And number 5 is, how do we measure it? Like, how do we know it's broken? How do we measure progress? How do we measure success? Pre-market testing, which is, the traditional stuff we focus on, which is testing early stage sacrificial concepts, and then testing usability, efficient, effective, understandable for both architecture, navigation, content, UI. And then number 8 was the one we added partway through the year, which was, is this ready for GA? And then in-market experience assessments. So how useful is this solution? The question that a lot of product teams come to us with is, why aren't people using this? We built this awesome thing. Why aren't they using it? Awesome. Let's do a usefulness assessment. And then how usable is this solution? Why are the completion rates low? Lots of people are coming to this, but they're not finishing this task. Awesome. Good question. We can help you with that. The best part about 9 and 10, I've had researchers say, good Lord, Jen, why are you allowing that to be on this list? Because this is the gateway. I've had product managers come and ask number 9, how useful is this solution? And then we bring out the list, we use it as a way to have the conversation. They look at number 9 and say, this is what's bothering me. I can't figure out why people aren't using this thing that we built. And then they go, and I guess I wouldn't be here right now if I had answered questions 1 through 8 in the first place, right? And we all laugh, and then we're like, yes, that's amazing. So we're going to do that next time. And we do. That's how we make friends. We make friends. I don't want to make you feel bad. Usually people will realize it when they see it. They're like, wow, I could have done this the easy way. Yes, you could have. So we're helping people make this really easy. We actually align this to the product development lifecycle. So yes, I said earlier, I am being judgy. So I'm saying these are critical product development questions because there are questions that are not critical and there are low value questions. And this is what the goddess, Erica Hall, has talked about in this book. This book is not for researchers. This book is for everyone, for anyone who's shipping product. It's so amazing. A good research question is specific, actionable, and practical. This chapter in here, it's early on in the book, is just absolutely fundamental to understand so that we're not asking low quality questions. And to add to that, in 2023, Judd Anton wrote a wonderful article called The UX Research Reckoning is Here, which talks about, introduces this term of middle range questions. They're like curiosities, but they're not anything that we need in order to get through the PDLC. And so we have instructed people when we actually have a roadshow, an infinite roadshow that talks about how to optimize research. And one of the things we do is teach people how to ask awesome research questions. And we include this slide in there. So stay away from the middle range, go for the strategic, and go for the technical. Those are really good areas of questions to be asking. But if you are like, how do users think and feel about identity? Like, that's not going to be great research, no matter how awesome the researchers are. Adopting new methods. So backing up a little bit to this problem, where we have a lot of narrow questions being asked by awesome product teams who mean well and really do need these questions answered. So they will often come and say, what do users need from my feature? And we may have to answer that 500 different times for every product team because the question is framed through the lens of the feature versus the lens of the user. And the feature, the solution, is predetermined as necessary. And no one wants to say to a product team, the feature you own may not even be necessary if we were able to design things differently or invoke new technology. But we want to get away from answering that question 500 times and over and over and over again, and instead bring up the altitude of the question. So what needs are most important to solve for these users when trying to achieve this goal? And that goal needs to be big. It needs to be something above and beyond a feature. It's not a task. It's not open an account. It's not pay a bill. These are bigger things that people are trying to accomplish. And so many of you probably figured out what I'm talking about is jobs to be done. The way we practice jobs to be done at Capital One is that we use a methodology called ODI, Outcome Driven Innovation, which was created by Tony Ulrich at Strategen. And helping people understand that we're trying to see the world through the lens of what the company, instead of what the company is doing, looking at the lens through what the user is trying to accomplish. I'm trying to put my kids through college. I'm trying to buy a home. I'm trying to buy a car. These are big things people are trying to accomplish. It's not about the features and the tasks. So we have them focus on these core tenets, and we've brought a methodology in-house to make this happen. Like I mentioned, we use the little white book, the Jobs to be Done book, as our guide to how we do this, but we've adjusted it based on what we need to do for our organization. We build job maps that are consisting of core functional jobs, job steps, and outcome statements. This is a standard taxonomy that we use so that we can do job studies throughout any line of business, anywhere, very quickly and efficiently. We also have a standard process that we use. So we have the pieces of the process that we do in-house, like creating the job map, the hypothesized job map and testing that job map. And then we work with vendors for doing the quantitative piece of it. And then we actually bring that data back in-house and make it presentable. And we have standard deliverables that we provide for jobs to be done studies, which are aimed at answering question one on our framework. We have a job map that shows you where there's opportunity, where it's lighting up in pink, that's the opportunity. We actually categorize the top 20 needs for the teams using this, and we give them an interactive scorecard so they can slice and dice to their heart's desire and have fun with the data, which is really important and engaging for them. And we activate this jobs to be done data in three specific ways. We use it to anchor ideation exercises. So hackathons and sprint weeks and all those types of things I get really frustrated when they're not anchored to really strongly proven unmet needs. So this is an easy way for them to pick up the top 3 unmet needs and bring it into that hackathon. The other thing is we do usefulness assessments with this information. We take the top 20 needs and we line it up against solutions that we've already built and shipped and say, are they actually meeting these needs? So that's an important way to self-reflect and figure out where we're missing, where we have gaps. And then measurement. We use high priority outcomes to as metrics that we add on to existing surveys. The process and engagement model is very simple. We put a standardized process in place of intake, planning, recruitment, execution, analysis, reporting, and action tracking. And we've been instrumenting this in JIRA and bringing it into each of the lines of business. We took one line of business and used that as a proof of concept so we could break this and rebuild it without hurting a whole bunch of people. There were 5 researchers in that area who were game to play, and we figured out what works and what doesn't, so now we can replicate that in the other lines of business. A lot of people get upset about intake when you use that word. I need to find a better word, because they think of themselves as ticket takers. Which is definitely I totally understand that. I don't wanna be a ticket taker either. So we run these as consultations. The researcher and the requester get together, talk about the background context for the request, where they are in the product development life cycle, decisions the team needs to make, what information they have, what information they need, any current hypotheses, super important to get the hypotheses. It's one of the most important pieces of data to prevent post hoc bias, where you show up and people say, "Well, I already knew that." Okay, well, yes, we did ask you what your hypotheses were, so we're going to list those out and tell you whether it's proven or disproven, whether we heard inklings of this, and when they need answers for this. And then the phase 2 is the researcher fills out the intake form in JIRA and they started the process. They have the product initiative outlined or named, the research question, the decision being informed, and the time frame. So the researcher is owning the intake instead of it being open to the crowds. Although I have run it the other way and it has worked well, but we want to make sure that we do things that are comfortable to the team. We also ship engagement model examples for or engagement models for each of the lines of business that we work in so they understand how to work. I mentioned earlier, a lot of product managers are taking on research responsibilities, particularly in smaller companies where they don't have researchers. And Teresa has been amazing at teaching product managers how to engage in continuous discovery habits and introducing frameworks like the OST, the Opportunity Solution Tree, which I think is absolutely wonderful. However, continuous discovery is different than structured discovery, which we just looked at. Structured discovery using jobs to be done, both qual and quant, is really important to anchor a team against what is really important to solve for. But here, what we do is we say these things are researcher led, proactive research, ad hoc research requests, rapid testing. And these things y'all can do on your own. Like you can have product team members having discussions with their internal users or external users whenever you want. If you want to talk to 5 people a week, that's great. But that's not researcher led research. So when this comes up and people are talking more about structured democratization, which I talked about 6 years ago, which still the fidelity model is still the model that I adhere to. I believe it is best in class for democratization. So go back and look at that presentation and look at a presentation from Kelsey Kingman and Marjorie Steinbach, who did a really good job of talking about how that program was built out. But if you're going to have democratization in an area, there needs to be mature product management and design. Like it needs to be best in class. Non-researchers have to be interested in or already conducting some forms of research, genuine interest in understanding customers and determining needs, open to research education and certification. Like we can run that in-house. It's not a problem, but I need to know that you're like, yes, I will attend 8 hours of research education so I know how to avoid bias in conducting research. We have legal risk and compliance procedures that prevent risk, and we have research operations funded in the area. And then this is what I was talking about. We need to clarify what makes a researcher a researcher. So a researcher is conducting discovery, testing, and assessment. They're using structured methods, in-depth interviews, surveys, jobs to be done, competitive analysis, lit reviews, diary studies. They know how to use all these methods. They know how to run these methods. And then they are applying human factors expertise in cognitive psychology, human computer interaction, and usability. This is what makes a researcher in UX research. So I always want to make sure that people see this so they think if they are thinking that they could do research themselves, that we're being honest about what that is going to look like and whether it's really research. Research objectives. We codified how research objectives are written before we ever even think about a research plan. So, first of all, we need a primary research question. I don't want to see a list of 91 research questions. I want a primary research question that is linked to the research framework. And then what we are going to provide back is what we will deliver, how that info is being promised to be used, and the research methods we're going to use. We do this for every project before we ever write a plan. We do this within 24 hours of having the consultation. We flip that back over to the stakeholder, they approve it, then we know we can write a plan. But we need to have this understanding before we ever move forward. It's short, it's sweet, it's not very complicated. But this helps us understand whether we are really going after the right thing. We take the research framework and these objectives, and we create at a glance learning agendas, which allow us to see for every OKR product initiative where we are going to be focused on what questions we're trying to answer. We can use this with heads of the towers and product area leaders to cross off things that just aren't important. I might say, let's look at this, pick three. We're not going to do all of it. We can do three. And then we turn that into a research roadmap and show like how that's going to move out across the months so they know what they're going to get. Insight syntax is the other big piece here, is that we needed to make sure the researchers were trained in how to write an insight. Um, so we talk about this called the what, the so what, and the now what. So, what did we observe or hear through the research? And we have to be very specific why it's happening and why it matters. And then one or more specific recommendations to eliminate the issue. It's really important that we always use this syntax. And the reason it's really important is because we want to be able to measure insights to action. We have an insights to action rate that's a target that we're going after. When I was at Fidelity, we were shooting for 70%, that we could say 70% of the insights that were surfaced were action. And then we do analysis on the 30% that are not action. So we understand why. What's getting in the way? Is it dependencies? Is it tech debt? Is it level of effort? And then we include insights to action, as we're looking at like accumulating all of these insights across all of this research. Will you action this recommendation is what we ask when we deliver something. When? If the answer is yes, when are you going to do it? In 3 months, in 6 months, in a year? And then if you're not going to do it, why? And then we also introduced a research rubric, which was streamlining manager and peer review. So this is just making sure that we have an understanding of what research should be, what expectations it should be meeting. There's certain pages that have to be included, and there's information quality that we're looking at. That there is a really good research question, according to Erica's rules, that it's answerable, practical, and actionable, that the research objective includes what will be delivered, what methods we're using, and how it will be used, that there are insights that are using the syntax, that we're showing, not telling, that we're using smart brevity, and we're using business appropriate communication. And then measuring progress. So we go back to the issues that we surfaced during the assessment and we figure out what it was that we were looking for. So, issue one, we want to make sure that we're getting an objective from this to this. We want to take this issue from looking like this to being like this. And then the KPI, what would we measure to indicate this? And then set a target percentage. So the examples of that are insights are not actionable. So if that's an issue that we're hearing, we want to say we want to go from low perceived actionability to documented actionability. And so what we're going to measure is insights to action. We're going to target 70% and we're going to track insights via JIRA to get to that number. Research takes too long. Great. Okay. So the perceived time to complete is too long. We want to make sure we're tracking streamlining and objectively quantifying how long it actually takes to do research. So we'll have tracked projects as a KPI, shooting for 100%, and then intake to approved plan in under 1 week, because that's an indicator. And based on our assessment, that was where a lot of slowdown was happening. It's swirl in the beginning of a project. So getting that to 90%. And then low researcher satisfaction. Experiencing low enablement, we want them to have high enablement. So we're going to measure research satisfaction through the survey that we run every quarter. And we want to hit 90% top two box. So this is the best way for us to set the KPIs and whether the transformation is actually heading in the right direction. Okay, so I'm going to close out with a couple tips. First of all, like I said, build relationship capital. Focus on humble inquiry. Make as many friends as you can. This is really important. Seek out other researchers and analysts. Attach yourself to existing efforts versus launching competing ones. Be really cognizant of things you're doing that may be perceived as competing against other initiatives. That is the quickest way to make enemies. So make sure you're fully aware. When you're trying to put something new in the water, go and talk to some of your friends and say, is there anything else like this here? Because I'm lazy. I don't want to recreate the wheel. So make sure you're always doing that. Be super clear. Clear is kind. Paint a picture of the future so that people can decide if they want to get on the bus with you or not. Uh, Explain what is and what is not working currently. We owe that to our people to understand where our performance is falling short of expectations and provide that constructive and actionable feedback. And I would say, I always recommend Kim Scott's book, Radical Candor. It's a game changer for managing folks. And then try new things. Try out new methods. See what other research disciplines are doing. Like I said, I learned so much from market researchers and the way they think about getting their work done and the way they tap into vendors too. Amazing. How creates brand trackers. This is really interesting work that can translate into UX research and learn about new technologies and experiment. I did not talk about AI today, but you would guess, yeah, there are experiments that we are running. And then here's my recommended reading list. So, humble inquiry, jobs to be done, just enough research, continuous discovery habits, and then the Marnie Kagan collection. And then two articles I think are very interesting: The Surprising Success of Hands-On Leaders, which is out in this month's HVR, and then Judd Anton's wonderful article about the UX research reckoning. So again, thank you all so much for having me. It was a pleasure, and I hope we can stay in touch.